Welcome to Pause Assembly, our miserable pile of podcasts. I'm Nodge, your pretty boy vampire host. I'm joined by Player 1.
Yo, I'm Aaron.
And Player 2.
It's Dracula spelled backwards. And I'm Leaky.
I'm so angry right now. We're going to be talking about Castlevania Symphonies of the Night today. So one thing I've already gotten feedback on is that these endeavors, these podcasts tend to assume familiarity in its entirety with even the basics of the game, and I know I hand-waved that in Dark Souls immediately. I said I said I'm just not going to get into what like a third-person action RPG is. So I would say Castlevania is one of the founding games of the Metroidvania subgenre of side-scrolling pseudo-platform RPG. It has you taking control of Richter Belmont in the beginning, but we'll get to that in a second. But most of the time you're playing Alucard, who is jumping, cutting, punching, and mostly backdashing his way through an ever-increasingly large, elaborate castle. Along the way you are defeating monsters, leveling up, beating bosses, gaining more HP, a la Zelda-ish kind of stuff. All on the way to defeat your father, who is literally Dracula.
Alright, so let's talk some hardcore marathon speedrun tactics.
Yeah, exactly. The cultural legacy of Symphonies of the Night cannot be understated. The reason why it is important is that it is one of the founding titles in the Metroidvania subgenre, which all have the aspects that I just talked about. Oh, I guess I should give the cue card. Castlevania Symphonies of the Night was released March 20th, 1997. God, I'm old. For the Sony PlayStation in Japan, I think. Or was that everywhere? It looks like it was released everywhere at the same time. Oh, no. PlayStation, March 20th, 1997. North America, October 12th, 1997. That's not too far. And everywhere else, November 1st that year. I already described everything else about it. It is known for being basically a masterpiece. Sight, sound, control. It ensured Castlevania going into the 2000s. Like, the profits they made on Symphonies of the Night basically funded all of the GBA Castlevanias. This is sort of the game. If you didn't play a Castlevania on the Nintendo, this is the game that people think about when they hear Castlevania. To the point where it is directly responsible for what, I forget the full title, but Iga coming back for Bloodstain, Rondo something, I don't know. He has the same naming convention for all this. So, which has nothing to do with Castlevania, except for that it has everything to do with Castlevania outside of legality concerns. What I want to talk about this game, what it contributed on top of everything I just named, was that I hate platformers. I hate platformers with a fiery passion. And this is probably the first platformer I played that I didn't openly hate. It's kind of hard to describe. As Alucard is moving around the map, I feel like I know where the game is paced so... It's not slow by any stretch of the imagination, but it's paced so methodically that I feel like, and Alucard is so responsive to your controls, that I feel like they could have put double the enemies on the screen in every part of the screen, and I would not have been in too much danger. I felt like this was the first platformer that gave me, I don't know, full control over a character. Super Mario Bros. 3 had way too many pits. I guess that's the closest one I can think of that I really enjoyed. Never a time when you're just going to fall in a hole and die. You're more often than not going to be warned, say if you cross into a room that's full of spikes, to not go into those spikes because there will be maybe an extra long platform before those spikes, just to give you pause before you do something like that. If death comes, it'll be during a boss or because you took way too much damage over the course of exploring a new area outside of a save point. Oh, you could save your game in this, which I believe is the first in Castlevania history. Because I believe, Simon's Quest had passwords?
Yeah.
And Castlevania 3 said, fuck you, do it again.
I was just going to reiterate that I think Symphony's brilliance is that it proves that while platforming is probably its biggest genre, it didn't rely on the hard platforming. It was pretty simple jumps, pretty simple maneuvering. Like you said, you had full range of motion. You never felt Alucard was out of control. You didn't have to worry about bikes or anything like that. It was light platforming and ignore it in the stages. I don't believe there was ever platforming during bosses or anything, other than moving vertically to
reach specific spots.
Yeah.
The first two bosses, I forget their names. I believe there were platforms there to help you dogfight them.
Yeah, but it wasn't anything hardcore platforming or anything. Nothing you need a Tanuki tail to avoid.
Obviously, I'm a big fan of Castlevania, and Symphony of the Night is one of my favorite games. I think that one of the things that everybody thinks of when they think of Symphony of the Night is the soundtrack, which is one of the premier soundtracks of that particular era. It was...
Sorry, I'm playing Wandering Ghost right now while we're doing this.
There's just a large variety of different genres, and all of the tracks are uniformly good. Even the hidden one that you could get by putting the disc in a CD player.
That's right. He expressly tells you not to do that. The voice actor for Alucard, if you put it into the PlayStation disc into a CD player, will come on and tell you that it's a PlayStation disc and not to play it for music. And then he says, "But you're not going to listen to me, are you?" And then if you do it, then he'll play music, and it's actually a pretty decent track. So, rendition of Vampire Killers.
And then rounding out the sound design, the voice acting, since you mentioned it, is comically awful. It is just terrible, but it's terrible in the way that it loops back around to being great. sort of like the early Resident Evils. It's enjoyable simply because of how bad it is.
I had a new person play Symphonies of the Night for the first time, and I may have joined in with the Richter Dracula dialogue, and they were not impressed. They were more like, "Oh my god, you have played this way too much." And I go, "Yes, just the beginning."
I believe it's a prerequisite for me to enjoy your company in my group of friends that you have to be able to recite that from memory.
Like a cipher.
Yes.
You meet somebody and you go, "What is a man?" And if they say anything but a miserable pile of
secrets, yes.
You call the police.
It's why I have a wine glass on hand to throw and shatter whenever necessary.
I had that explains way too much, actually.
But enough talk.
That's literally all we're here to do. The composer, Michiru Yamane, I'm pretty sure I got that right. I'm probably wrong. She went on to do a lot more, but I remember after this that she stuck out for me on was Skullgirls. And I don't know how the guys at Lab Zero scraped together the money to afford her, but whatever. It was worth it. She did Suikoden another time. For Suikoden, that is. Huh. And the Cowboys of Mumesa, but I guess, there's you gotta put in the time, I guess. So that is one of the reasons why Well, I mean, those are the reasons why the game's considered a masterpiece. Like, everything came together in this perfect storm of hashtag video games. While you were jumping around to get the bat power up, you had to fight like a boss made out of dead bodies while the best music was playing with probably some of the best sprite animation to ever exist, especially for that time in video games. We're giving you the correct visual cues to actually fight some bosses. Like, there are like bosses that are more like DPS checks in games, especially nowadays. But I really felt like Castlevania Symphonies of the Night had bosses that I was engaged with until I was, too busy trying to farm the sword spirit, and I ended up 10 levels higher than I needed to be for half the game.
Yeah. Really good gameplay, really good music. The game was pretty to look at. Lots of secret stuff to discover. In fact, a little bit over 100% of the game was entirely hidden until you figured out how to unlock it. Yeah, it's
hard segue there. The way that game got away with such huge content was that after you had to jump through some hoops, but to get to the true ending of the last part of the game, you are to the middle part of the game. Once you got through that, the castle that you've become intimately familiar with by that point, because you've had to backtrack a lot through it, turned upside down, and you could travel between the two castles, the regular castle and the upside down castle, and explore it all again, but to actually get to the final battle with Dracula. And they did that because they got away with that because they just literally reused all the assets. And that was brilliant. With the amount of... I'm not intimately familiar with the PlayStation hardware or how much individual sprites and animations took up on the disc, but being able to just reuse the background probably saved a heck of a lot of space. Elevator assets and all that. You didn't have to create what would be 2 times the normal amount of content. That had to be worth something. I think they might have used that saved space to touch up a lot of the animations, really make that game stand out even in the series, let alone video games in general. I can't understate how much of a pain in the ass that upside down castle was.
It was not easy to navigate a lot of the time, and also it was occasionally not very fun to navigate, just because the visual cues the game gives you are not great. I mean, it is literally just the regular castle flipped upside down. And
there are some problem areas with that, if I recall, though none of them come to mind specifically. You mind giving us a few examples, if you have them in mind?
I don't really have any specific examples, although I will say that there were some embellishments in certain parts of the regular castle up in the upper corners, like near the ceiling, and that in the inverted castle, those embellishments were frequently used to hide spike traps, which did an absurd amount of damage. So that's one consideration.
The aforementioned new person who was playing Castlevania Symphonies of the Night for the first time ran afoul of the first spike traps in the conservatory, and that was the end of that run.
Yeah, they'll hurt you real bad.
Spikes, man, not even once. Said Alucard. Might be Dracula's spell, but you know what? No, I'm not giving you the satisfaction.
We'll just edit that out in post.
The only other game to try something like this was Metroid, wasn't it? By that time, I'm sure there's maybe 1 or 2 titles that tried something like this, but never. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is maybe The Legend of Zelda, or even Link to the Past. Because Simon's Quest isn't really what this game is. Simon's Quest is, I don't even know what to call that game, really. I don't know what that game is.
In some respects, it's the same. Like, if you're defining a Metroidvania as an open world game, which gates your progress by forcing you to find specific items or power-ups in order to proceed to certain parts of the map, then, I mean, yeah, that's something Simon's Quest did.
Fair enough. I'm still, I guess, haunted by the shadow of the air quotes action adventure genre, and air quotes, which was literally everything for a period of time. So. I
mean, I have some fairly uncharitable things to say about Castlevania 2, but that seems like a different that seems like a gab for a different day.
That's a different and I might need to drink a bit, but still my favorite. My point is that besides, I don't think the game was lightning in a bottle, though, because we've had so many. It helped found a genre, subgenre of gameplay, and we've had so many excellent entries into that subgenre, of which Shadow Chronicles was not there. The Shadow Complex was not one, but it can't be. I feel like I'm doing a disservice not to just keep bringing that up. That if you're what was the latest one that came out? Axiom Verge, the latest big one, the latest big indie darling was Axiom Verge, I think. And that story kind of fell flat to me. Maybe I just didn't get it. The game seamlessly, and not Axiom Verge, but Symphonies, seamlessly blended this sense of exploration. Not necessarily, in comparison to Dark Souls, focusing on the danger of that exploration, but more or less, ooh, what's over here? And you were a half vampire badass, so more than likely anything you found in that room was going to die before you did. Whether it be flying books or the aforementioned giant ball of literal human corpses, whose name I remember to be Grand Falloon. And I can't stress how much that helped make it. I believe that's what helped make it a success over something like Metroid, that just sort of felt, not that Metroid didn't sell gangbusters, but the atmosphere in Metroid felt oppressive. You didn't know where, at the very least in Symphonies, you could refill your life by going to a save point. And so, therefore, you kind of explored in spurts, and that was intentional. You could always just go back and get your life back. That was not necessarily the case in something like Metroid, where the original Metroid, which I believe still is the only game that really comes close to something like this. To go back to Simon's Quest, it had nothing like that. It had absolutely freaking nothing like that. As a matter of fact, I'm having trouble. You went to a priest to get healed, right? And you had laurels made you invincible. They didn't heal you. What
Yes.
did you use to heal in that game?
It was
I call
indeed.
it the reset button.
It was indeed. You would visit the church.
And that was it? How did I beat that game?
As far as I recall.
So you wanted to go see more of this huge place that may or may not have maids with inexplicable vacuum cleaners at the time, or giant plants that turn into Medusas that turn you into stone. There's just this giant variety of incredibly well animated enemies for you to annihilate.
Yes, it should be reiterated here that there was a giant variety of enemies, none of which were particularly threatening. You could pretty well... The learning curve in Symphonies of the Night was very lenient, and it actually, as you progressed through the game, the curve curved in opposite the way you would expect it to. Like, by the time you were in the late game, you were pretty much unstoppable.
Pretty much. I think there were some of the larger enemies, like your Axe Knights, those guys you were kind of meant to maybe die to once, and then never again once you saw their pattern. But that was it. One of the reasons why you were so brutally overpowered was the variety of items that you can get. It was part RPG. you had an inventory, you had hit points, you had a magic bar, which I guess I'll talk about magic later, and every so often enemies dropped items and what have you, so you were sort of encouraged. Once one enemy, the first time you see an enemy drop something useful, you're going to kill everything in that room repeatedly until they drop something. Whatever it is. And
that was the first Castlevania game that introduced farming as a mechanic, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, because it sure as hell wasn't Castlevania 2.
Because the only other aspect like that is the special weapons, the dagger, the holy water, and those were always in set pieces.
Yeah, that was more Ghouls and Ghosts inspired. Ghouls and Goblins, whatever. That was... Castlevania 3 was pure platformer. That was less adventure than anything. Were things dropping in Castlevania 4? No, that was just more...
Yeah, Super Castlevania 4 was a traditional Castlevania game.
Yeah, only you could whip in 8 directions and do the weird whip noodle thing.
Indeed. And it had that mode 7?
Yeah.
Is that the right mode?
Yeah, that's the right mode. There were 6 before it.
You had some really interesting backgrounds that took... this just turned into a Super Castlevania 4 podcast.
Yes, it did. Okay, so this is the first time where utterly dominating an enemy in an area was not just a tool of survival, but a tool for dominating the next room of enemies. Where Super Castlevania 4 had, you were badass by the virtue of them telling you you're badass and you surviving past the 3rd level. Symphonies, I think you really felt it. That Alucard was basically an unstoppable force, and he was definitely going to kill Dracula until he stood in water for too long, I guess. But then you could get a relic that changed that. There were several relics, I forget how many exactly. They changed some element of gameplay, I'm not going to say fundamentally, but drastically.
They were all pretty much ways to get around the platforming, like double jump, flying, not worrying about water, things like that.
But that was, I mean, have we even seen that since? Because you could turn those off. I don't know why you would want to. I'm no speedrunner, but like, I still don't know why they gave you the option for it. It was not like there were any choices, to my knowledge, that were closed to you if you had your double jump relic on.
It was the same reason that they made late game weapons other than the Chrysogrim. It's just about giving you options as a player.
Okay, yeah, I wasn't done talking about items. So, like, the wiki article I have says from swords to nunchaku, and I don't think that even does the variety of weapons available to you justice. Knives, swords, javelins, spears, fists, both armed and unarmed, fireballs. Could this Alucard equip whips? Because I knew there wasn't a vampire killer in this game, which I have not talked about continuity yet. That later.
I don't believe there were any whips, no.
Okay. All of that, this big variety of weapons was backed up by, as I stated before, the single most solidly controlled character I can remember from that time. So you equipped a new item, you swung it around a couple of times, and you got a fairly good idea of how to use it. And so, depending on your playstyle, you kind of fell into preferring different weapons for different situations, or you just went around punching axe knights in the face. I mean, it was literally about whatever you wanted to do, and I cannot stress how liberating that was at the time. It was a game that you could explore at your own pace, play in your own fashion, and it played with you in that idea. If you wanted to go, man, Death stole all of my crap and I'm getting it back, and I'm not using this item until that, then yeah, you could do that. And it did not require a whole lot of skill to play the game like that. This was a game that was not gated, I really think. I think that most people could pick this game up and go someplace with it. They might not particularly end up enjoying it, but there was nothing stopping them for doing that, other than their own personal preference. I think. I don't think difficulty spiked so much as Aaron said, it looped back around suddenly. Okay, not suddenly, but gradually, sometime around the upside down castle.
Every so often, you just run into a boss that maybe kicks your ass, but
the creature comes to mind.
Overall, if worse came to worse, you went to go level up and go farm a new weapon that you haven't picked up yet, and normally, by the time you come back to it, skill, you're going to beat him. And that's if you don't retry naturally, you just change tactics.
Yeah, I feel like it was, like I said, the controls for Alucard that you almost felt like it was your fault if you died. Like I had a tougher time with some bosses than others, but I never really felt like the game was being unfair. I will admit that my knowledge, or my memory on that is muddled by over a decade of playing other games. I remember the creature who is literally just Frankenstein's monster, being able to deal a surprisingly absurd amount of damage, and that was the trick to that battle. You had to just not get hit. Like you just could not get hit, and of course that's how you beat all bosses, but that wasn't necessarily the case for every boss before that. And then there was that giant thing with the lightning rod that I don't think I ever beat. He was an optional boss, though.
The game also gave you lots of potions and like 100 different types of food that you could use to restore your health on the fly, which is just not something that you had before in a Castlevania game. Like the ability to restore your health anywhere at any time was, I mean, it made the game significantly easier than games that came before it. That and, air control, a Castlevania first.
Oh yeah. For anyone not familiar with the concept, you mind elaborating on that?
Sure. So
what is air control?
In previous Castlevania games, when you jumped, you would move in the direction that you were holding at the time you jumped until you landed, and if you sort of changed your mind midair, there was really nothing you could do about it. Air control allows you to adjust the direction you're moving after you have jumped, which is, just like you can do in real life. It allows you to, adjust your direction, fine-tune where you want to land, and so the addition of this, I think, really cleared up one of the main issues that people had with Castlevania's controls, which was the fact that, you would sometimes jump and then just immediately regret it as you careened off an edge or into an enemy or whatever. Symphony of the Night was, as is the case with many aspects of the game, it was much more lenient than the games that came before it.
You think that was intentional? Do you think that those design choices were not only made from I really need to read up more about this now, I'm super curious. Do you think that might have been a design pillar, not just due to previous complaints with Castlevania, but due to the choice of the character that they had? Like, not only was it fundamentally a shift in gameplay, it would help you feel more like Alucard. Because, you're not human. You don't fuck gravity, said vampires in general.
I've talked to a few people recently who have played Castlevania games, classic Castlevania games, for the first time, and while I can't speak for people who were playing the games back in the day, what I can say about people who have just picked up those games recently is that they absolutely loathe the controls. I think that if people's sentiment back in the late 80s and early 90s was similar to what people's sentiment today is, then the decision was just about making the game tolerable to people.
There's also an argument to be made that it was based off of hardware, have the technology to always have you in full control.
Super Mario 3, you had air control. In Super Mario 2, you had air control. In.
I'm just trying to say, like, it's not necessarily deliberate that they did it. I don't know.
I see what you're saying.
Could have just been the upgrade to PS1 technology.
I see. Especially in the case for Mario 3, some of those environments were very small compared to everything that went on in the clock tower in Castlevania 1.
Never had to have dodged Medusa heads like Alucard did. So
no, all they had to deal was that fucking sun. Screw that guy. The only other thing I have to talk about here is how Symphonies of the Night. We were talking about this earlier off the air, but there was a story to Castlevania. It is one of the things that drew me into the series. I guess quick tangent, because I've been meaning to get this out somewhere. I don't know where else to get it out. In the first Castlevania, there's like a splash screen after you hit start, where it shows Dracula's castle and Simon Belmont. You're standing looking defiantly up at the castle, and then it goes into gameplay. You are already in the courtyard of the castle. There are no enemies, but you are standing completely still. And my 8-year-old mind was like, wow, that guy's scared. He's like, that's the last chance he has to turn around. And you start on the left side of the screen, so your initial Super Mario Brothers instincts kick in, and you start moving to the right. And I thought to myself, like, okay, so this is me making the choice to get this done. And that always stuck with me about Castlevania. And I don't know if that was intentional or the idea that they meant to forward with, especially that first game. But compare that to Symphonies of the Night's opening, particularly Alucard's entry into the thing, where he's just moving, like, forgive the pun, a bat out of hell through the forest, like at Mach 3 towards the castle. He jumps into a raising drawbridge to show that he's deliberate. This is where he was supposed to be. Like he's coming for somebody. Though it's never explicitly stated. But if you're in a game called Castlevania at the time, it's probably Dracula. So then you immediately begin setting upon annihilating every enemy in the initial court in that game. But I'm actually... go ahead.
The first enemies you encounter in that game are giant and incredibly scary looking, and you just ruin them. Like there's no difficulty in defeating those enemies whatsoever. And
I don't know what the wolf attack animation looks like.
The whole scene is just framed to make Alucard look as cool as possible. Before he gets all of his crap stolen by Death.
He hits them and they erupt into flames. He hit them that hard. Everything about that start is designed to make you believe in that Alucard's going to be the guy to turn Dracula inside out. But even that's getting ahead of ourselves. We touched on it a little bit earlier about voice acting and a hilarious exchange between Richter Belmont and Dracula. But the game actually starts... The Symphonies of the Night starts with the end of Super Castlevania 4.
Dracula X.
Dracula X, my bad. It starts with Richter Belmont, who is just about to fight Dracula at the end of Dracula X. And this, you go through that end part with, a little bit of changed boss physics. Like, you can't die in that fight as Richter Belmont, though it kind of takes once you're familiar with that fight, it takes effort to die in that fight, but it's a fairly straightforward battle. Richter is victorious, spoilers, and that sets up they do a text scroll for the story. They explain, I think that's where they explain Alucard's story, and then it cuts back to what we were saying. But that's the first time in a Castlevania game that I think the story was acknowledged. I don't know, when was Bloodlines on the Genesis? Because they flat out said, what's her face, the mother of all Belmonts or something like that.
Bloodlines was sort of interesting because they integrated characters that were direct relatives of characters in Bram Stoker's Dracula, which is something that they hadn't really done before.
Indeed. Castlevania it uses all the public domain monsters you can think of as just like throwaway monsters for the most part. It didn't have any relation to any of the more famous properties. It's just that you can say Dracula and it's Dracula. And it's always been Dracula. So, as somebody who was into comic books at the time, just seeing continuity between games, which there wasn't any of in, say, the bigger franchise at the time, Final Fantasy, Super Mario Brothers, Zelda didn't have any continuity between, the 2 games that were out, 3, 4, plus the one on the Game Boy, maybe 2. There was continuity between the Metroid titles, but I hated Metroid 2. So, but it was not the focus of the game. It was never the focus of the story, or the focus of the game to focus on that part of the story. When you see in this game direct, deliberate action on the part of the previous game's protagonist, and how that affects even just the start of this game. If you end up dying in that opening sequence with Richter, a little girl runs on the screen and starts praying your power-ups into your soul. And you become invincible and amazing, more so than necessary. That girl's name is Maria. She is in Symphonies of the Night, only older. So if even there were tenuous links before, she's there telling you to quit screwing around and quit killing those who dropped the sprite relic. I forget, but I remember sitting and watching one of our mutual friends, who was supposed to be on this podcast, for like 45 minutes try to get that to drop. And I was like, wow, this better be worth it, and it wasn't. But yeah, she would tell you to quit farming for sprites and go kill Dracula. That sort of narrative connection, that was the first time I experienced that sort of narrative connection, that sort of continuity, and that made the game even more special for me.
They later went back and sort of retroactively made a timeline that integrated the events of all of the previous games, and boy howdy, that's a read.
You don't say! I'm gonna enjoy that more later. Yeah, just a quick skim. This is nice.
I've been enjoying it myself as I knocked the earlier Castlevania games, so...
Were there future Castlevanias that called onto these events at all? And Harmony of Dissonance doesn't count.
A little bit, yeah. Some of the ally characters that you met in Castlevania 3 showed up in later games.
Sci-fi Grant.
Obviously, versions of Alucard are just all over the place.
Just lousy. Castlevania is just lousy with Alucards.
Just all over the place.
Has there been a Castlevania that didn't include the Belmonts?
Bloodlines.
Technically, Bloodlines. Technically, Order of Ecclesia. Though you have your entire job in that game is to find the Belmonts.
Bloodlines was the one where the main character was John Morris, the son of Quincy Morris from Dracula.
Yes.
And as far as I know, that was the only time that the actual Dracula story sort of made its way into the Castlevania universe, aside from, of course, Dracula.
What was that one on the DS that I really liked? Portrait of Ruin. Jonathan in Portrait of Ruin is sort of a super secret hidden Belmont, and he has to fight Symphonies of the Night Richter in order to unlock the secrets of the Vampire Killer. I've been referencing Vampire Killer this whole time. Vampire Killer is the name of the ancestral whip of the Belmonts that has the power to kill. We don't know.
Just about anything, apparently.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's not much it can't kill.
I'm being facetious. It's supposed to be able to kill vampires, but it's actually pretty good at killing everything else, too. So
Cthulhu gets whipped just as hard as Dracula, actually, by that thing. So
Cthulhu, actually a fairly low-level enemy in...
yeah, he's not all that impressive.
Yeah, he's kind of weak sauce. In the grand scheme of Castlevania. Was there not... Yeah, that is Jonathan Morris. Was there a time afterwards where Alucard was either playable or mentioned directly?
He was
Yeah,
like he was a secret
so much-
boss battle in one of the DS games.
Yeah, wasn't he directly in those games? Just by another name?
Well, yeah, some of the later Castlevania games got into the whole concept that characters were reincarnations of previously existing characters, or it gets really complicated. You check out the flowchart on my website; it'll tell you all about it.
I am looking at this timeline. I'm not seeing any kind of direct reference, and I sort of wonder why they did that. Okay, the danger of continuity. The danger of leaning on continuity is that you alienate your new fans. They have to go through everything that you did do in order to enjoy what you're doing right now, and that's not how you make money. I've always enjoyed the effort that people put into those kind of stories, especially when they're well. Video games are not good at that, historically, or at least the era of video games that we're talking about now. I can't speak to other franchises. I don't know if the, say, Crash Bandicoots were all in continuity with each other, and I can't really say I can.
Oh yeah, there's a pretty deep, rich lore for Crash Bandicoot.
I don't know if one game leads into the next. The same thing with like Banjo-Kazooie or something. Wait, Banjo-Kazooie get a sequel? Okay, I'm getting off track. But
Yes, it was called Banjo-Tooie
that's right.
because somebody thought they were funny.
And they were.
And they were
Let's give
correct.
it to them. Yeah, come on. Let's get a chuckle. Anyway, I enjoy that because that's how I got to. I put myself in those games that way. Anything beyond that, and you're just getting into hardcore arcade quarter munching at the time. And I really wanted nothing to do with that. There needed to be something to hook me, and this was one of the things that Symphonies used to hook me. Was that it referenced previous games that I liked in Dracula X and Super Castlevania. I never beat Super Castlevania, and I sure as hell did not beat Dracula X. So the fact that it was the beginning of this game, I kind of liked. It made me go back later and go, hey, I want to kind of play through this all the way, and then I still promptly did not beat Dracula X. Still, that did not mean it did not make me go back and try, I guess. More game franchises have had lasting continuity since then. Not enough for me. The largest of which is guilty of the sins that I am pointing out is maybe The Legend of Zelda, maybe Final Fantasy, that almost have nothing to do with each other except for the title and maybe some of the characters. Yeah, could they be improved? I just know that this game's Symphonies of the Night is known as one of the greatest games of all time for a reason, and this can be counted as one of those reasons. Okay. Oh, I want to talk about magic a bit, and I got off on everything else. So on top of your freaking half vampire son of Dracula that's waging a one-man assault on what is essentially the bridge between hell and earth, and the entire time you are stone-faced. You are not fazed by these horrors that you are dispatching with by the pile, right? On top of the items that you're swinging at major sledgehammer levels, even though I think you could actually get a sledgehammer, on top of the relics that you could find, on top of life that you could get, well, the life increases that you could get, you also had access to fighting game-like magical spells that would do various things. Soul Steel could, it attacked everything on the map and healed you for a number, like it was some formula based on the number of enemies that were on screen when you executed Soul Steel. You actually got to show their lineage, you got access to Dracula's teleport fireball, which he's been using since the first game, and there's 7 more on top of that? On top of that, if you knew the motion, he had access to them at the start of the game. When you got control of Alucard, if you just knew what the motions were, you could just do everything.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the purpose of that mechanic was.
There was a lot of stuff in that game that rather than having some specific utility, it just seemed like the developers thought, hey, wouldn't this be cool? Like, I don't think the game ever explicitly tells you the button combinations that you have to input to cast those spells. You just sort of have to figure it out on your own.
It doesn't?
I don't believe it does.
Holy crap, how the hell did you know?
Like, that stuff gets...
I think you did, actually. I think there were hints or something that dropped.
There almost had to be, because if not, some of the ridiculous, like down-up fireball motion attack.
I think it wouldn't be too hard to get the first couple of spells in your spell. Like, once you cast a spell the first time, the motion would be input in your spell book, and you could look it up. And, like, once that happened the first time, you would sort of be turned on to the idea that, like, hey, if I do certain button combinations, like, something cool is going to happen. And none of them were so complicated, I think, that you couldn't figure them out by experimenting a little bit. That being said, the spells were not particularly powerful, and I recall when I played through the game, I almost never used them, just because...
You could buy them from a store. That would tell you how to...
Okay, so you can buy them from the Master Librarian dude. Okay.
You had to be interested in that, because...
But yes, you didn't need the scrolls.
Were there multiple shops, or was it just the one shop? There was only the one shop, right?
It was just the one, yeah.
Yeah, so the game was built around... The game had to be built around that shop to a certain point. Wasn't there an item that teleported you directly to the shop? Library ticket?
The library card, yeah.
Yeah. Well, they thought they were funny, and they were. There was one shop, and was it after you beat a boss he got new inventory, or did he just have all of the stuff from the start?
He just had all the stuff at the start, including one of gaming's first vanity items, a cape that you could change the color of. Like, there was a sub-menu where you could go in and change the RGB values of the cape lining, and that was pretty cool.
That's right. I forgot about that. That was a freaking selling point for me. Like, you could what? Wasn't there? There were some. We'll call them vanity items. There was an item that, like, the description was discreetly increases height, and I couldn't ever tell what it did, but it turns out that it was like a pixel higher. Like, it made, yeah, it made Alucard a pixel higher, and I don't know if that actually did anything, because I'm not sure how hitboxes worked in that game. I'm not sure if it was like literal contact is literal contact or not, but that was great though. The game had a sense of humor. On top of being a fairly, I wouldn't call it difficult, but it was definitely something you could sink your teeth into.
I'm deleting this whole file.
Because vampires. Okay. Anybody got any fun stuff about it? This is a... Go ahead.
You want to talk about the Symphony of the Night Tiger handheld game?
I will as soon as I Google it. Go ahead.
Okay. It was a Tiger handheld game. It wasn't very good.
Yeah.
Great googly moogly. There was a Tiger handheld game for Symphonies of the Night.
There was probably a Tiger handheld game for a lot of things that I'm not aware of.
$189 on eBay right now. That can't possibly be any good.
Well, it's a Tiger game, so no.
Sorry, I was reading the story.
For anybody who's listening who is not familiar, Tiger handheld games were fairly inexpensive, portable, very bad versions of good games that you could play on real systems.
Let's see here. If you played Smash Brothers, Mr. Game & Watch is basically what started Tiger handhelds. If you ever played Octopus, that's the kind of game the Tiger handhelds were. Basically moving LCD watch display, but only in the shape of video game characters. and with very vague descriptions for victory is the only way I can describe it. They were terrible, and yet they sold a lot. They were a fraction of the cost of consoles and a fraction of the cost of console games at the time. His parents were probably like, "Hey, you wanted Castlevania, right? Yeah, Symphonies of the Night, right? Well, I didn't want to spend $60 on that, so here's the $10 rate." And that's when Leahy would probably throw his glass and it would break. The game is a favorite to be run in the speedrunning community as basically a raw display of power.
Well, it lends itself to the speedrunning community, and it's old enough that it can be broken over a speedrunner's knee.
Yes. Against the might of the speedrunner, it is not a very well-programmed game. However, the speedruns I watch, they don't use a whole lot of bugs. There's a whole lot of backdashing. Oh, this was one of the first Castlevanias, is not the only Castlevania that you could backdash. Alucard was way too strong for it, though, I think. Could Richter in Dracula X backdash?
No, he had
What's the guy that could backflip?
That was Richter.
That was Richter, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
If you hit the jump button again while you were in the air, you would backflip, which was extremely useful. It was the first time you had really any choice about where you were going after you jumped in a Castlevania game.
So Alucard had the privilege, I guess, of like speeding his way through these sections of not very dangerous enemies and just annihilating them, making it look completely effortless. And the backdash was one of the ways that he was able to do that. He was able to more easily avoid damage than any Castlevania character beforehand. I'm not so sure. I'm not familiar with the handhelds as much as I'd like. I think I started at Portrait of Ruin, and I was like, oh man, this is actually pretty good. But you were the Soma Cruz crew more than I was.
Moves. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I basically cut my teeth on Soma Cruz, so...
evasive moves became sort of a thing after Symphony of the Night. Like, after they gave you the amount of control you had in Symphony of the Night, they did not go backwards.
And God bless them for that.
Haha, Dawn of Sorrow. I just got that DS.
Yeah, that's how the DS games are named, dude. Like,
that's a good one.
Advance Wars, Dual Strike, DS.
Yes, the game made Igarashi a household name amongst gamers at the very least. It solidified his legacy pretty hard. Like, I mean, it's not every day that a guy founds a genre. Basically. If you're gonna start in Castlevania, nothing before this game. If you're like, I wonder why they made this brand new anime on Netflix for about it, nothing before this game and nothing with the title Lords of Shadow.
The first one isn't terrible.
It's also not terribly easy either. One of the more just mechanically difficult games on the NES. Mainstream mechanically difficult. There's some shit in the NES library is what I'll say. Castlevania 2 is just esoteric. That's just obtuse after a certain point. Even though I think a lot of the criticism that comes down on that game results from them not talking to the townspeople, as they pretty much gave you the keys to drive that game. Castlevania 3, yes, but there's a level below Massacre platformer. Whatever the level below that is, I would call Castlevania 3. I, for lack of a better term, I'm not really trying to insinuate anything by this, I would call that a hardcore platform. That is a platformer for guys that like platformers.
I could talk a lot about the merits of Castlevania 3. It's
Indeed.
Probably my favorite of the old style Castlevania games, and it's pretty tough.
After Symphonies of the Night, was there another Castlevania on the PlayStation?
There was Castlevania Chronicles, which was a remake of an earlier game.
So no. And then we went to handhelds,
64?
right?
Well, yeah. After
Well, you guys are going to have to fill in my knowledge for the N64 for these things. Because
I have none. So.
when I believe Aaron and I played Mace when it came out, and I was like, nope. And I think I spent most of my time playing StarCraft at the time. So, yeah, like I missed all the N64. Oh, just about. So.
I played both of the N64 Castlevania games, and I know I know that the prevailing opinion on these games is that they are just awful, just the worst. I'm not going to go quite that far. I think they had some merit, but I mean, if you're going to play a Castlevania game, like that would not be the one to choose. Like, if you're going to go to town, you might as well go in a Lincoln. And in this case, the Lincoln is Symphony of the Night. That would be the Lincoln.
All of the handhelds are derivative Lincoln knockoffs, but they are no less fun, I would say. All of the handheld Castlevanias are no less fun than Symphonies of the Night. They are less.
They also tie into Symphonies of the Night, but they don't rely on you knowing anything.
Maybe that was it. Maybe that was the decision that they took.
You know, you later
That
learn
makes sense.
Soma is Dracula, but
Oh God, spoilers! No.
you know, or
Yeah.
when one dude reveals he's Alucard.
I could,
No.
I could talk about Portrait of Ruin, but that's pretty much the only other Castlevania I had extensive experience on past Symphonies of the Night. Order of Ecclesia, and I tried, oh lord how I tried, and no. Harmony of Dissonance maybe, but Harmony of Dissonance is...
That was a different game, though. Like that was a game for you just to have multiplayer Castlevania. It didn't really expand the story or anything.
Wait, Harmony of Dissonance, it's saying that was on the Game Boy Advance. What am I thinking of? The game...
When you have Despair. My bad.
Despair, yes. Whatever the one that was released on Xbox Live.
Yes.
But even that was past the first level. That was a game about playing Castlevania multiplayer, about getting you and your friends who love platformers to play Castlevania multiplayer.
And
so,
then yelling at them when they fail a jump.
now you just leave them and then start crutching up and down to the stick.
My Alucard wasn't leveled up enough. I needed him to do the extra DPS to the boss. That's
Did
why
you
I
actually
brought
play
him.
that on? Did you actually play that online
Yeah.
with like
I played
randos?
with people. Like you
Oh.
people.
Oh, then I was probably that Alucard. I apologize.
No, it's the aforementioned friend who was supposed to be on there.
Really,
Okay.
really just dragging the dude here tonight, huh?
Just piling on a guy that's not here. All right.
The point, if I can't talk behind his back.
The handheld. My point is that the handhelds are probably more accessible than Symphonies of the Night. But honestly, you should be playing Symphonies of the Night. This is literally one of the greatest video games ever created. Period.
Honestly, outside of dialogue concerns, I think Symphonies of the Night holds up just as well as the GBA games and the DS games.
And the dialogue is great if you like hilarious non sequiturs.
Die, monster! You don't belong in this world.
Enjoy B-movie or their ilk. You'll enjoy Symphonies of the Night's dialogue.
But let's be serious for a second. That was the only time really that it got super corny. Like there's the talks with Maria, which are basically her just exposition dumping on you, And then there's the talk with, okay, Richter in the Coliseum. Okay, I see what you're driving at. Then there's the Dark Priest, Shaft, who is hilarious. And then there's Dracula, which, yeah, never mind. Point taken. Not a minus, definitely a plus. Yeah, play Castlevania Symphonies of the Night. Great game. Any closing thoughts?
No, I think we just about covered everything that I wanted to talk about.
Art direction, music. Yep. Leaky?
No, nothing that we haven't already said.
Okay. This is where an outro would go. I have not come up with the outro yet.
It's just in case there is no outro at a later point of date. It's still Dracula spelled backwards.
Damn it. Okay. So, way back, I came up with this joke, if you want to even call it that. I think I'm extraordinarily clever. Every so often, I would just go, oh shit, really loud. I would get the attention of everybody, and then go, it's Dracula spelled backwards. And everybody would hate me for the rest of my life. And only with the release of the Castlevania Netflix show has more than one person keep using that bit on me, and I hate it because I want to do it. They basically beat me to it. Okay.
Recording and delete the whole podcast.
Anybody have anything they want to plug? Aaron.
I write and draw a webcomic called The Fisherman, which you can find at fishermancomic.com. It's good.
Yes, especially if you like some of those hilarious non sequiturs only with luchadors. Leaky.
I got nothing to plug.
Cool.
Unless you want to add to my Patreon, Gabe Newell at Patreon.
We're not doing this.
I only run in hundos, so no small bills.
I have nothing to plug, but there might be more things coming down the pipe. My end. We'll see how this goes. And until next time, this would be my exit, my snappy pause assembly exit line, which might just be, this is my snappy pause assembly exit line. Good morrow, citizens. This has been episode 2 of the Pause Assembly Podcast. The song you're hearing is City of Light by Aaron. Leaky buys the pizza, yes, that's his name. And your host and audio mixing is done by some pretentious jerk. Next up is Chrono Trigger with a guest if he can make it this time. Thanks again.